XRP has checkmated the financial system. And this is because they have been quietly positioning themselves over the past couple of years exactly where the next liquidity crisis would hit the hardest, and that is Japan. They are currently already being used by the banks in Japan. And this is huge because what Jake Claver has been talking about over the past year is the reverse carry trade, which happens between Japan and the United States. But I'm going to break this down because not a lot of people are able to understand this on a very basic level. And if I can understand it, anybody can understand it. So there's three different factors in all of this, and they're all interconnected. And it's the Japan reverse carry trade, the US liquidity crunch, and the multi-country remittance shocks. And they're all interconnected. And XRP and Ripple have positioned themselves perfectly to be the savior for all of this. And if you've been watching my videos over the past months on TikTok, you've heard me say over and over again how our current financial system has spiritually and physically become damned. Because in spirituality, when you block energy from flowing, it becomes damned. You are literally damming it. That's no different than like a river and putting a dam in it because it's blocking the flow of energy. That's exactly what the Federal Reserve is, because it acts as a reservoir. They can control the flow of money. They can print as much money as they want. They can do quantitative tightening. It's all control. XRP is going to undam the financial system spiritually and physically, because in spirituality, you want energy to be able to flow through the body with no blockages, anything like that. Well, the new financial system is the exact same way, because you don't want any borders, you don't want any barriers, you don't want any time constraints. You want that liquidity to be able to flow as smoothly as possible, anytime, anywhere, with low fees, all of this stuff. This is important between countries. And most people don't understand this about XRP, but XRP is not going to be a currency like the US dollar per se. It is going to be on demand liquidity, and it's going to be a bridge currency for the other currencies to be able to exchange back and forth and be able to flow through the financial system freely and smoothly. So let's get into the reverse carry trade. And I'm going to make it super simple to understand because I know you guys only want to know what's going on with my XRP. When XRP go up? What I want to mention first is what a corridor is. And a corridor, for example, this is a basic example, but here in the United States, we have a lot of people from Mexico that come here, live here, work here, and send money back to their families, exchanging the US dollar to the Mexican peso. USD to Mexican peso is a major corridor. The United States dollar to Japan yen is also a major corridor. But the problem with this in the current financial system is that you have nostro and vostro accounts. And on the exchanges, you have to front run the liquidity from both sides. So the United States side of the exchange has to front run the liquidity with a lot of US dollars. And the Mexican peso side of the exchange, for example, has to front run a lot with the Mexican peso to complete that exchange. But the problem with that is that it's very expensive. It takes a long time to send the money, and it creates bottlenecks. And you guys are going to see here in a second why this is such a huge deal with the reverse carry trade and Japan. With the reverse carry trade, traditionally investors were able to borrow very cheap Japanese yen at 0% or -%. So they are basically getting paid to invest in the Japanese yen. And then investors would take that and invest in other assets like US treasuries, which were at like a 4%, because the United States had a different policy with their dollar. But over the past week, we have seen the Japanese yen go up above 1% for the first time since 2008. Simultaneously, we are seeing the United States end quantitative tightening. This is basically the beginning of the reverse carry trade sending shockwaves throughout the system, because now investors are no longer as profitable taking loans out in Japanese yen and investing in United States assets. So they're going to start retracting and start wanting to pay off their debt and their loans in Japanese yen. But it's more massive than that, because we are seeing a actual policy change in the Japanese yen. This is a signal that they are moving towards this change for the midterm, at least. Simultaneously, we have the United States ending quantitative tightening. So it's not like the Japanese yen just moving their yield up and their policy, changing their policy. You have two currencies going opposite directions at the same exact time. And this is more massive than just paying off those loans. It's going to cause a huge liquidity crunch. And if you are invested in XRP, you are watching history unfold, basically, because this is happening in real time. The news article of the Japanese yen hitting 1% was just the first domino. This is going to cause an unprecedented liquidity crisis globally, but also between the United States and Japan. And I want to go back to the corridors. So both sides of the exchange, the corridor has to be equal. There has to be supply and demand for both sides. There has to be front-run liquidity put into these accounts, the Nostro and Vostro account. But you have the United States printing all of these dollars, and you have the Japanese yen they're not printing as much of the Japanese yen. The Japanese yen is strengthening, so there is less demand for the US dollar. It's creating a huge chain effect. But the problem with these accounts is that not only you have to have the front run liquidity, but it's also very slow. They want this settled immediately. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds in all of this, but these two countries are basically going to be forced to use XRP. And I just want to call attention to the fact that Japan is the largest importer for oil, and Japan buys their oil using the US dollar that is being devalued. This is going to make it way more expensive for Japan and all of these other countries, but there's less demand for the US dollar. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds in all of this, but also the banks in Japan are already using XRP. This is the equivalent of the ETFs that these companies in the US are using. The ETFs are basically like the Nostro Vostro accounts, except in the traditional financial world, you don't have to pre-fund the exchange of the currency on either side. This is what XRP is going to be. And this is why the ETFs have been buying the XRP from the OTC market. This is so in a crisis and a liquidity crisis, they already have the XRP available in the exchange traded funds to be able to exchange with other countries that have the XRP in their banking system or an ETF, which Japan already does. This is the moment all XRP investors have been waiting for. It's the supply crunch. It's the actual demand for the token. It's the actual use case, the utility of the token. In a liquidity crisis, this is what's going to happen, because these countries are going to be forced to use XRP to exchange the currency back and forth. And XRP is perfect for all of this, because as the reverse carry trade starts to unwind, the Japanese yen is going to get stronger. This is going to cause more of the reverse carry trade to unwind, and the Japanese yen gets stronger and stronger versus the US dollar, which the United States is already going to be printing more dollars. This is massive, guys. And as this reverse carry trade starts to unwind further and further, investors are going to want to get out of assets like the US Treasuries that were at a higher yield versus the Japanese yen. And they're going to want something where they can settle it immediately and not have to wait days, because they don't know what's going to happen to the Japanese yen versus the US dollar in a couple of days or a week or whatever. This is the problem with the traditional financial system. It's very slow. It costs a lot of money to send these transactions. This is why we need XRP. And as this oil crisis starts to come in the picture too, this crisis is going to become more noticeable as it goes on.